Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jagdeep Ahluwalia, and I'm the founding secretary of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce of Greater Houston, which I currently serve as executive director. IACCGH President Tarush Anand joins me in thanking Dhruv Jayashankar for delivering today's keynote and India's Consul General Aseem Mahajan for joining today's webinar. I want to start off by introducing our Chamber Executive Committee, our board, our directors at large, and our advisors. Today's webinar will be recorded and forwarded to all participants, and we will load it to the Chamber's website, IACCGH.com. If you have any questions for our distinguished speaker, please type them into the Q&A box. We are proud to be serving the business community for over 20 years, and we work closely with our sister chambers and associations. On behalf of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce of Greater Houston and the Greater Houston Partnership, we thank our partner organizations, the Asian American Hotel Owners Association, the Fort Bend Chamber of Commerce, the Indo-American Political Action Committee of Greater Houston, India Culture Center, Club 24, the Indian Doctors Association, IIT Alumni of Greater Houston, the Indian Muslims Association of Greater Houston, India House, Seva International Houston, who will also be live streaming today's event, the Small Independent Motel Owners Association, the Texas West Africa Chamber of Commerce, TI Houston, US-India Chamber of Commerce of Dallas-Fort Worth, which, like your chamber, was created 21 years ago, and the World Chamber of Commerce of Texas. We want to thank our long-term sponsors whose support helps us continue to serve our community. Brass Inc. We will be hosting their CEO, Bal Serene, on Open Forum this Saturday at 4 p.m. Lyondell Bissell, Piping Technology, and Shipcom. Shipcom's CEO, Abizar Taibji, informed us of a multi-million-dollar contract they closed during the pandemic and sent us a text message that I want to share with our viewers. Shipcom is a product of the vibrancy of Houston, the fairness of USA, and exceptional ecosystem of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce of Greater Houston. We want to congratulate Abizar and Shipcom. We also want to recognize Shell for supporting our Women Mean Business and Shell Distinguished Lecture Series, which we plan to resume soon. The Greater Houston Partnership is the mother chamber in our 9-county region, and we are proud to collaborate with them today. I invite Susan Davenport, Senior Vice President and Chief Economic Development Officer of the Greater Houston Partnership, to make her welcome remarks. She serves as Senior Vice President, Economic Development at the Partnership, which is a 1,100-member business partnership encompassing not 9, but the 11-county Greater Houston region. In this role, she leads the organization's domestic and international economic development and trade efforts and provides assistance to companies considering expanding, relocating, or investing in the Greater Houston region. Prior to her work in Houston, she served as presidency of the Gainesville Area Chamber of Commerce. Before working at the Gainesville Chamber, she spent 13 years with the Austin Chamber of Commerce, most recently as Senior Vice President of Global Tech Strategies. She received a Master of Public Affairs from the University of Texas at Austin and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing from the University of Texas Medical Branch. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite Susan Davenport from the Greater Houston Partnership to make her welcome remarks.
Thank you, Jagdeep, for that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. And on behalf of the Greater Houston Partnership, thank you for joining us today for the webinar on the resilience of U.S.-India relations. Again, my name is Susan Davenport, and I'm the Senior VP and the Chief Economic Development Officer for the Partnership. And in this role, as Jagdeep said, I also lead our international investment and trade initiatives, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all today for our program. Before we get started, I want to thank the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce of Greater Houston for really making today's event possible. In particular, I want to express my appreciation to Jagdeep, who has always been such a great ally and partner of ours. Today's event is the result of many, many years of close collaboration, and despite the many changes we're experiencing during this new age of COVID-19, I am happy that we can find ways to continue to work together. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to Dhruv Jayashankar, Director of the U.S. Initiative at the New Delhi-based Observer Research Foundation and our guest speaker for today, as well as the Honorable Aseem Mahajan, our Consul General of India in Houston, who has provided such a great relationship for us here. Thank you all for being here. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Greater Houston Partnership, we're Greater Houston's principal business organization, and we do help advance Houston as a great global city, working across economic development and public policy initiatives. The partnership provides a wealth of support, information, and resources that help our international businesses to thrive in our region, and we provide a platform to connect foreign companies and entities with members of the Houston business community interested in investment and trade opportunities. Houston's economy is deeply tied to global trade and foreign investment, and we enjoy deep commercial and cultural ties with India. In fact, India is our 6th largest trading partner, and India-Houston trade is at an all-time high of $10 billion in 2019. In recent years, Houston has also emerged as a growing hub for the Indo-American community in the United States. In the last 5 years, we've had the opportunity to have 2 mayoral-led trade missions to India with the current and past mayor of Houston. During our most recent mission in November of 2018, Mayor Sylvester Turner and the Greater Houston Partnership, in collaboration with the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce of Greater Houston, led a trade mission to Delhi and Mumbai, where we had very productive meetings with Reliance, IACC, the PhD Chamber of Commerce, and the U.S. Ambassador to India, among many others. And last year, the partnership and several of our board members were privileged to attend the Howdy Modi event at NRG Stadium, where we welcomed Prime Minister Modi to Houston, along with President Donald Trump. As you can see, India is and will continue to be a very important partner from Houston. Discussions like today are important in ensuring our region's long-term global competitiveness. We look forward to continuing our work with you all, and we'll strive to find new ways to develop mutually beneficial relationships and strengthen our international connections with key partners like India. Today's discussion is certain to be productive, and I would like to thank again each of you present today for the role that you play in promoting the relationship between India and Houston. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, not only for co-hosting today's event, but for being a long-term partner of the Chamber. We love working with the partnership, not only on the delegations, but on closing the deals with the people we have met in India. I want to give out a shout out to Jensen Shen, who many a times after a delegation has made time on a weekend or in the evening for a visitor from India, who's flying in just for the weekend to meet them. And the result of that is Texas today is the #1 state in America for inbound investment from India, and we are proud of that. And Houston ranks right on the top of the cities, the best cities to invest in. I would now like to invite the president of the Indo-American Chamber and the chairman of our board, Tarush Anand, to welcome you all on behalf of the Chamber. And he will then introduce our keynote speaker, Dhruv Jaishankar. Tarush is an attorney by profession and a partner at the law firm of Brown Sims, where he practices civil litigation. He has represented a broad range of domestic and international businesses in various types of business disputes across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to invite Tarush Anand to make the formal welcome on behalf of the Chamber and introduce our keynote speaker. Tarush Anand.
Thank you, Jagdeep. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. For those of you who are Chamber members, welcome back. For those of you who are new to the Chamber, let me tell you a little bit about who we are. We are a Chamber of Commerce that was founded 21 years ago. We are here primarily to do 3 things. First, provide a platform for local businesses and professionals to grow and succeed in their respective trades and businesses. Second, to facilitate trade and commerce between the US and India. And third, to be the voice of the Indo-American business community here in the greater Houston area. We do that in the form of various programs and events, all of which I won't go over today in the interest of time, but I would encourage you to visit our website, IACCGH.com, or contact us to learn more about us. We'd love to have you be members and help us grow our mutual businesses. With that, let me move to today's event. These have been unusual times, obviously, for the past 3-4 months. Who knew back in March when all of this started, when social distancing was still a cute new phrase, that we would still be doing virtual events? But one of the beauty of that is we can get far speakers to come join us with fair ease. And so with downsides and adversity come opportunity as well. We've seen that in business, and we see that with events as well. So we are very pleased to have with us today Dhruva Jaishankar. Mr. Jaishankar is director of the U.S. initiative of the New Delhi-based Observer Research Foundation. He previously worked at Brookings India in New Delhi, the German Marshall Fund, and the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C. He is a regular contributor to the Indian and international media, and presently writes a monthly column for the Hindustan Times. Welcome, Mr. Jaishankar.
Thank you, Tarush, and thank you to my friends in Houston, and especially Jagdeep Aluwale and his colleagues for making this possible. I made two very memorable trips to Houston over the past several years, and hope to return again to the great state of Texas. It says so much about your state that it has become synonymous with around the world with so many industries, from agriculture to energy to healthcare, education, and of course space. And it might surprise you. I think one of the things that might surprise a lot of you who are in many of these industries, to know that at one point of time, the most lucrative and important commodity traded between the United States, not necessarily Texas, but the United States as a whole, and India, was in fact ice. And I think this is actually an interesting way to start my presentation. 200 years ago, a wealthy Bostonian named Frederick Tudor started harvesting and shipping ice from the rivers and ponds of New England to warmer climes. And at first he focused on places in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. But over time, he developed this audacious plan of shipping ice all the way from New England to Calcutta in India. And this, in fact, which was a big gamble at the time, made him millions in today's dollars. He became known as the Ice King, and he built these beautiful storage buildings known as ice houses in 3 Indian cities, in Calcutta, in Bombay, and in Madras, today, what is known today as Chennai in southern India. And in fact, I know there's some people on this call who are from Chennai originally. If you go to the beach in Chennai, you can still see that ice house, which is now associated with the famous Indian spiritualist, Swami Vivekananda. But what's interesting is that this ice trade, which for a while started up very quickly, was very lucrative, it stopped almost as quickly as it started. Technological developments such as the making of ice artificially in plants, and then refrigeration in the early 20th century made this entire industry redundant. And the reason I bring this up is that the rise and sudden fall of the ice trade, to me, in some ways represents the waves of engagement, the turbulence, but also the long history and the opportunity in the India-US commercial relationship. Today, we associate the US-India commercial relationship with services, with automotive parts. I've had the pleasure of visiting the Mahindra factory outside Houston. Defense, LNG now, which is a major export to India. But 10 or 20 years from now, things will look quite different. And the changes we're witnessing just this year, whether it's coronavirus, the almost certain global recession that we'll see over the coming months to years, and of course, increased US-China competition that Houston is currently experiencing firsthand, these trends will accelerate some of these transitions that I'll get to in a second. But it makes it all the more important that we anticipate what the future of the India-US relationship looks like. So let me quickly sum up the India-US relationship. Dennis Cox, who was an American diplomat who served for many years in South Asia, wrote a book on the United States and India a few years ago, and he called it Estranged Democracies. And I was always struck by the title, Estranged Democracies. Of course, the title in some ways overlooks a lot of things that the US and India did do, whether it was cooperation during World War II. In fact, many American servicemen served in India during that time, to the cooperation against China in the 1950s and 1960s when there were shared concerns about the rise of communist China. But while there was this political estrangement, especially from about 1965 to 1995, the people-to-people relationship between India and the United States quietly blossomed. And I think there's no better testament to that than the large and vibrant Indian diaspora in Houston today. I like to make the argument that, why this happened, why there were political differences between these two large countries, and yet at the same time, this burgeoning people-to-people relationship It was due to a certain number of qualities that I think make America exceptional. And I don't mean American exceptionalism in the way that term is often used, but actually literally. There were in fact three things about the United States that ensured that it remained attractive to Indians despite the political differences between their countries. The first, I think, was American democracy, the rule of law, belief in free market, free markets. And I think we take it for granted, but Indians proved to be naturally comfortable in an environment where there was that rule of law, where there was democratic politics, where there was a sort of free market culture. And you see this in terms of where Indians moved to in the 50s and 60s and 70s. It was the United States, it was the United Kingdom, it was Western Europe, it was places like, just to some degree, Canada and Australia. But it wasn't to places like the Soviet Union, which was politically much closer to India at the time. But I think it wasn't just the sort of democratic values. That was certainly one element of it. There was also an American spirit of liberal internationalism, and particularly after World War II. And this was driven in some ways by the Cold War, this idea of global competition with the Soviet Union. But this also saw a big increase in American aid and assistance. In fact, for a few years in the 1960s, India was the single largest recipient of American foreign assistance. But also things like the creation of the Peace Corps. And I mentioned that because even now when I go to all different parts of the United States, I still meet people often of a particular generation who did spend a couple of years in India as part of the Peace Corps. Finally, I think another element was a very important element, of course, was the United States immigration policy, and particularly after the passage of the Hart-Celler Act of 1965, under the administration, of course, of a great Texan, Lyndon B. Johnson. And for the first time after 40 years, since the 1920s, you saw an increase in the United States of high-skilled immigration from many different countries, including, in particular, India. Now, of course, there were other factors that drew people to the United States. There was the American universities, the dollar, and Hollywood, all of which actually remained without serious competition. But I think again, we take some of this for granted. I think it was these underlying principles of democracy, rule of law, liberal internationalism, and a particular immigration regime that really attracted Indians to the United States, and ensured in some ways that the relationship deepened, even at a time when the geopolitics was often adverse. So after the end of the Cold War, and India, this coincided in some ways with India's economic liberalization in 1991, the natural convergences start to align with the political convergences. And we saw the relationship advanced with visits to India by Bill Clinton, by George W. Bush, 2 visits by Barack Obama, 1 in each term, and of course 1 by Donald Trump. In fact, India was one of the last places he visited before the coronavirus pandemic earlier this year. On the Indian side, leaders as diverse, and these are leaders from very different political parties, very different persuasions, Narasimha Rao, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh, and of course Narendra Modi today, all worked very hard to advance the relationship and in fact stick their neck out against conventional wisdom in India to deepen the relationship with the United States. The economic relationship, of course, was actually cemented by a crisis, and I think it's something also to keep in mind today with the coronavirus pandemic. And this crisis is one that seems sort of quaint in comparison, which was the Y2K bug in 1999 and 2000. And again, in hindsight, it doesn't seem like that big a deal, but suddenly actually a combination of a large number of English-speaking trained engineers in India, coupled with a few policy tweaks that had been in place in India in the 1980s and 1990s, and then the sudden global demand for their knowledge and expertise, it sort of kicked the India-US economic relationship into another gear, a higher gear. And again, this was despite political differences at the time over India's nuclear weapon status. So a combination of the Y2K crisis and this attempts at overcoming the question of India's nuclear weapons program actually pushed the political relationship forward. And from India's nuclear test in 1998 to 2008, when the civil nuclear agreement was concluded between India and the US. And this opened up doors to much greater cooperation, including in defense and in global affairs. Let me fast forward quickly to the Trump presidency. For the first time after Donald Trump's election in 2016, serious questions were raised about whether those pillars that made America exceptional would continue, and whether the United States would remain committed to upholding a liberal international order, whether it would remain engaged with the world, whether it would continue to attract global talent. And I think with the partial exception of that last point, which I'll get to in a second, the answer, I think, has been mostly yes. In fact, trade between India and the United States has actually increased over the last few years, even as the trade deficit, something that the Trump administration has been very focused on, has actually decreased between the two countries. So in some ways, we have more balanced trade today, even as the overall pie has grown. Defense cooperation has increased too. We now have the highest level policy dialogues involving the Secretary of Defense and State with their counterparts in India. We have new military exercises, the first exercise between the Army, Air Force, and Navies at the same time between the United States and India that were conducted just a few months ago. And the Indian military now uses 7 major defense platforms sourced from the United States, with the possibility of a few more coming online soon. Shared concerns about China have actually led to much greater, much deeper cooperation between the two countries, often in the context of their separate Indo-Pacific strategies. And more immediate differences on China, whether on trade, the boundary dispute in India's case, or issues like corporate espionage, which has been in the news again in Houston, have actually pushed this relationship closer together. And we're seeing a level of cooperation today that really would have been unimaginable 15 or 20 years ago. There's certainly been a share of challenges too, some of which were not fully anticipated. One is continuing differences over how to deal with Russia, which remains a major defense partner, in particular of India, not a major trade partner. But the relationship with Russia has become politically very controversial in the United States. The tightening of immigration, I think, has also proved a challenge, whether it's tourist short-term visas, whether it's students, and the recent move by the DHS to potentially suspend certain F1 student visas. And again, this decision was reversed. But I think the uncertainty has really affected the decision by a lot of Indians to want to come to the United States to study. Non-immigrant workers as well, H-1Bs and J-1 visas, and of course the naturalization process. And all of these, I think, questions have been thrown up about them, which have affected the bilateral relationship. I should add, though, however, that this is not just an issue in India-US relations. This is really part of a domestic debate in the United States about immigration policy writ large. And finally, I'll end with, where is the relationship going? While we may see a partial trade agreement soon between India and the US, India's Commerce Minister hinted at this just a few days ago, we are in the midst, in some ways, of a collective crisis. The onset of the coronavirus pandemic, coupled with the economic consequences of that, and to top it off, increased geopolitical competition with China. The combination of this is really, I think, both a challenge for both of our countries, but I would also look at it as an opportunity, although one with caution, which is why in some ways I began with the story of the ICE trade. While the services sector, the defense industry, and the energy sector may provide the sinews of the India-US commercial relationship today, the coronavirus pandemic and the push for renationalization of supply chains in various industries will actually undercut a lot of our traditional assumptions about where the relationship is heading. In fact, the chief generators of value as major economies come out of the recession will not be I think, measured in conventional terms. It will not be in sort of traditional goods trade and other such indicators. The chief generators of values will really be in a number of new sectors. It'll come in the form of automation, in terms of targeted digital services, in health services as well, and new forms of energy generation and storage. In this sense, international cooperation, including between India and the United States, will require certain other attributes. It will require programming skills. It will require the cleaning and anonymization of large amounts of data, but it would also require respect for the rule of law and for the security of individuals. And when you think that through to its logical conclusion, it makes it all the more clear that the India-US relationship will be as important, if not more so, for the two countries going forward than it has been over the past few decades. So I'll end on that note, and I look forward to your questions, and I'd be happy to take questions on these and any number of other things in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhruv. So 21 years ago, when the Indo-American community in Houston got together, about 40 of us, actually about 45 people got together with the then Consul General of India in Houston, Rinzing Mangri, to create the chamber. We were ahead of the curve. India was not the flavor of the month then. In fact, this was before Y2K, but we had the honor and privilege of realizing that India would have a major role to play in the global economy, and we are proud that it is today. I'm also happy to learn that my ancestors were using the ice from the USA to add to their scotch from England for their evening beverage. So that was some information that we learned from you today. Again, on behalf of the Houston community, we thank you for agreeing to share your wisdom and knowledge with us today. We have invited 6 leaders, 5 from America and 1 from the Indo-American Chamber in India, to present questions to give a broader overview of where we are going. And the first question will be asked by Harris County Commissioner Adrian Garcia, who I will introduce. He was a city council member when we first met him about 15 plus years ago, then the sheriff of Harris County, and now Harris County Commissioner, representing over 1 million constituents. He's a great friend of the Indo-American community and nationally recognized for his trailblazing efforts in accommodation policies, allowing Sikhs to serve with their articles of faith. You may have heard about Sandeep Dhaliwal, the first officer in Harris County, who unfortunately died an unfortunate death when he was shot at a traffic stop. But he was brought onto the force thanks to Adrian Garcia as the Harris County Sheriff at that time. He was responsible for encouraging supply diversity in purchases at the Sheriff's office when he was there. As County Commissioner, he's responsible for a series of special grants for COVID-affected small businesses and working on purchase reforms at the county. A strong supporter of our local economy, IACCGH past President Sanjay and I had the honor of accompanying him when he visited India earlier this year to help grow bilateral trade with India. I now invite Adrian Garcia, our commissioner, to ask his first question. Commissioner Garcia. If he is not,
I believe we may have connection problems with Commissioner Garcia. You may want to
I have received a question from his office that I'll ask on his behalf. His question was, I represent Harris County, the 3rd largest county in the US and larger than 26 states. We are home to the Port of Houston, the largest port in the US in international tonnage. On a recent trade mission to India, there was a tremendous interest in direct shipping lines between Houston and India. With the growing trade ties and the Make in India campaign, what do you see as the future of maritime trade between the US and India?
Thank you, Jagdeep, and my thanks to the Commissioner for asking this question. You know, it's interesting to see trade in goods will have its own dynamics. The two countries today are fighting over every little bit of it. But as long as there's a level playing field and there's global supply and demand for key commodities, key intermediary goods, key finished products, trade is likely to flow. Now, there are some obvious challenges, one of which historically has been in India, limited capacity, limited port capacity. And I think to put it in perspective, the Indian ports are today able to process about 3 times as many containers as they were able to a decade or 2 ago. But it's still, the combined capacity of all of India's ports is about 1/3 of Singapore. So it's still, there still is a major capacity constraint on India's side, although a lot of capacity is being built and has been over the last few years. Now, it's important to note, I think, that trade as a percentage of GDP globally has been flat over the past 12 years since the 2008 global financial crisis. Despite that seeming sort of negative news, I think there are discussions underway about shifting supply chains, and there are concerns at the political level about overdependence on certain supply chains, particularly mainland China. And we're starting to see incentives being offered not by the United States alone, but by other countries as well, to shift supply chains out of mainland China. Often gradually, this will be a 5 to 10 year process in many cases, to other places. The most obvious beneficiary of a lot of this will actually be Southeast Asia, parts of Southeast Asia, countries like Vietnam, which are just at this point of time better equipped to benefit from some of these shifting supply chains. But there's no doubt that some of it at least will shift to India. I think if India can get its domestic act together, obviously a larger share, because India offers a scale that most other countries, including in Southeast Asia, do not have. But at the same time, if I think India underperforms, there will still be a minor shift to India. So I think that this paints in some ways a cautiously optimistic picture that we will see an increase in trade, but a lot of steps remain in terms of whether India can get its domestic capacity for trade and domestic policy ingredients in line to fully take advantage of this. I'll end on just one note. I think one of the issues has actually been India's cabotage laws. So shipping to a single port is fine, but shipping between Indian ports by foreign shipping companies is actually quite constrained still. So I think these are the kind of incentives that will need to be changed if India can fully take advantage of the changing circumstances and increase direct shipping between major ports such as Houston.
Thank you, Dhruv. The Chamber will continue to work on developing a closer tie between the ports in India and with Houston. I would now like to move on to the CEO of the World Affairs Council, Houston, Marianne Maldonado. With an accomplished background in international affairs with both the Department of Foreign Affairs Canada and UK Trade and Investment, and recognized as one of Houston's most influential women by Houston Women's Magazine, and also the Chief Operating Officer of the Year by the Houston Business Journal, Marianne Maldonado currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston, Houston's premier organization for international learning. Marianne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jagdeep, and thank you, Dhruva. Our question is, we have a US election coming up in November, and with the various key issues that are going to remain between India and the US, trade, as you've just spoken to, defense, especially concerns over China, what areas or priorities do you think might be different if Joe Biden becomes the next president?
Thank you for that question. And so it's one I get a lot, in fact, and including in India, there's a great deal. It always astounds me how much interest there is in India every US presidential cycle about the candidates, the personalities, their policy positions, and so forth. I'd start off by saying one thing, which is the India-US relationship has been a bit unusual compared to a lot of others, in that it's actually one that has improved a little, mostly under the Trump administration. So it's one of the few relationships, I think, where we've seen sometimes gradual improvements, but improvements nonetheless from the George W. Bush to the Obama to the Trump administration. And you can't say that about a lot of other countries. It's also good news that India is not a serious point of discussion or debate in the presidential campaign so far. Oftentimes, the question you get in India is, why aren't the candidates talking about India? And I often have to point out that that's a good thing. If you look at the countries that are often the subject of discussion debate, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, it's usually not a good sign. I would say, I think under a potential Biden administration, there will be some things will not change dramatically, but I think there will be a slightly different emphasis. There may be a slight slight change in policy on China, for example. We have seen a real hardening in the last few months on the US-China relationship. But China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi actually dangled the possibility of a more cooperative relationship should Biden be elected president, and that would have implications for India as well. At least the seriousness of the India-U.S. defense partnership vis-a-vis China will I think decrease a little bit if there are attempts at resetting the relationship. On trade, I think we may not see as adverse frictions because there won't be as much of an emphasis on the trade deficit that the Trump administration has focused on. But at the same time, I think a lot of the concerns about trade with India are actually of a bipartisan nature. And we did see some moves by the late Obama administration against India as well. There were hearings on Capitol Hill about India's trade practices and so forth. So I think, again, we may see a slight easing up there, but not a major difference. Other things, security, global governance, I think there will be a gradual continuity there. I would highlight two major areas of potential difference, though. One is on climate change, something that has been completely off the table with the Trump administration. It's been, at least at the federal level, although state governments have often stepped up to fill the breach. But the fact that after the US withdrawal from the Paris Climate Treaty, this is just an area that no longer features in the bilateral relationship at the highest levels. And this is a time when India is very focused on diversifying its energy supplies. There's a major push for solar energy, for wind energy. So I think that'll be one area that'll come back on the agenda under a Biden administration. A second area I think of major difference will be on immigration policy. And I did mention that a few times in my talk, but I don't think we'll see the suspension of H-1B visas to the same degree, although there is a strong push amongst Democrats on Capitol Hill to reform the H-1B program. But I don't think we'll see the same kind of severe measures being taken. We won't see this kind of uncertainty about students. So I think immigration and climate change will be two areas where we'll see major departures. In other areas, I think we'll see some minor changes at best. But I would also emphasize that I think for India, the Trump administration has been, in fact, an opportunity to push forward the relationship in a number of ways that other presidents may not have.
Thank you, Dhruv. Our next question is from Sunanda Vishisht, a writer, political commentator, and a columnist. She has written extensively about the conflict-ridden state of Jammu and Kashmir in India. She also writes and comments about India-US relationships, and we are proud to call her a friend, Sunanda Vishisht.
Thank you, Jagdeep. Thank you for inviting me to this, and thank you, Dhruva, for that very enlightening talk. You talked about estranged democracy is the phrase that is often used, but India and United States are not estranged anymore, but they're still in a complicated zone. My question to you is about this recent border flare-up with China. India received total and unambiguous support from the United States, which was wonderful. As the threat of China-centric world looms large, many analysts are of the view that this is now going to put India in what they call American camp. But it's not as easy as it seems. I mean, both countries are also quote unquote prisoners of their history, and India more than United States, and India is not fully ready to give up on its strategic autonomy principle. The much anticipated trade deal, we keep talking about the trade deal, but the much anticipated trade deal is still up in the air. We keep hearing statements, but nothing has happened on the ground yet. And United States on its part keeps poking India with its small things like H-1 visas or student visa uncertainties, which the order which was thankfully rescinded. How do you think both countries, realizing that they must be on the same side of the global order now, same side of the liberal global order or stable global order, how do you think they will get over these little pokes and little frictions?
Thank you, Sunanda, and it's great to see you. Thank you for that question. I think you touch upon what is in some ways a very central debate and discussion in India about its place in the world, including its relationship with the United States. And I think sometimes in India, this tends to be become very simplified and unnecessarily so. That is, either India should we be an ally of the United States, or no, and becoming an ally is not desirable, that we should be autonomous. I don't see this as actually an impossible circle to square. I think India won't be, I think it's quite clear that India won't be a treaty ally with the United States in the way that the United States established certain relationships during the early Cold War and middle Cold War period. So, and in part, this is not just about an Indian desire for autonomy. I think it is also a very realistic assessment of the United States' ability to commit to that kind of relationship with India. And in fact, the US has shown no sign of wanting to commit to that kind of alliance relationship with India. In fact, the US is in the process of renegotiating some of its alliances, particularly under the Trump administration, with NATO, with Japan, with South Korea. And forget about other treaty allies like Thailand and Philippines, which are much more complicated. So, so I think there is a realistic assessment on both sides as to it's not going to be that kind of relationship. That being said, I think we are seeing a much closer alignment of strategic relations on most issues. Certainly on China, certainly on the Indian Ocean, and this is something that both the Obama administration, when President Obama went to India for Republic Day in 2015, and the Trump administration in the first summit with Prime Minister Modi in 2017, both emphasized the Indian Ocean cooperation. Even Afghanistan, a point of where there was considerable difference 10 years ago, there's much closer collaboration today. So I think on strategic matters today, we are seeing a much closer alignment, and that will continue. And I think it's also true that both countries have had those kinds of relationships in the past with others. The US with China, in fact, after 1972, where it was certainly not an ally, but there was certainly much greater cooperation between the US and China when it came to the Soviet Union, which at that time they both saw as a primary challenge. And also India, for its part, had a relationship with Russia that was in some ways a quasi-alliance after 1971. So again, I think there has been an ability on both countries' parts to be flexible about a lot of this. Also, I think the reality today is that if you look collectively at the kind of relationship India and the US enjoy today, it's in fact closer than a lot of the United States' other security partnerships. If you look at the number of exercises, the depth of that, the depth of political exchanges that take place, I think one area that's still sort of underserved is really the defense technological relationship, and we're entering into a phase where that's becoming slightly more complicated. Until now, the hindrance had been on the US side in terms of technological access that it was giving India for legal reasons and others. Many of those problems have now been resolved, and the challenge in some ways has shifted to the Indian side about how to best take advantage of this opportunity that the US is offering India for the absorption of very high quality, high level defense technology and collaboration. So I think we're entering a phase of where the problem is somewhat different. Finally, I'll say that, I think there are those frictions. I did mention them on trade, on immigration, on there'll continue to be differences on Russia, I think, which will be quite problematic. But the challenge, I think, will be how do you contain them, set them aside, make sure it doesn't affect the areas of cooperation. There have been periods of time, I think 2012, 2013, we saw a lot of this where some of the irritants in other areas were affecting the broader India-US relationship. But to the extent, it's not that these problems will go away, but I think to the degree that we can insulate them, that will make the strategic cooperation, the strategic relationship much more promising.
Thank you, Dhruva. Our next question is from the chairman of the US-India Chamber of Commerce, Dallas-Fort Worth. We have a 21-year relationship with the Dallas Chamber. We were both founded at the same time, and we've remained friends and partners since then. The chairman of the chamber is Raj Kalyandurg. He is a board member of the Salvation Army, Pratham, and the America Indian Foundation. He's involved in Montessori New Beginnings Academy. He's a managing director with Merrill Lynch Private Wealth Management Group, a financial advisor leadership program graduate from Merrill Lynch and the faculty from the Wharton School. He is a certified private wealth advisor, CPWA designation. Raj, I invite you to ask your question.
Thank you, Jandeep. This is very, very interesting. Thank you for your comments so far. They've been very, very helpful. My question is, where are you seeing the immediate opportunities between the US and India, particularly to strengthen our relationships?
Thank you, Raj. I would say I would look at sort of two time horizons here. One is really in the next few years, the short-term time horizon, and as I mentioned, I think we will see a great disruption to supply chains, and that will present in some ways more opportunities. There's still many aspects of the India-US relationship that seem to be performing below potential, and whether it comes to, again, a lot of traditional goods trades. Right now, it's still very much driven. I mean, if you look at what constitutes trade between India and the US, apart from services, it's still very commodity driven or low value added goods. And so there is a lot of potential there. But that being said, I think, again, the longer term, the medium term challenge will really be in other new areas. The real contest will be what in areas that some people call the fourth industrial revolution. This will be, and in some ways the challenge will be, these will be hard to measure as well. It'd be harder to quantify the cooperation amongst researchers, the back end work that people in India would be doing for companies based in the United States, for collaborations between universities and such. So the real avenues of cooperations, I suspect, will be in these areas. It'll be in artificial intelligence, it'll be automation, it'll be 5G telecommunications, additive manufacturing, biotech. A lot of the fixes, I think, to make these a reality will actually be required on the Indian side. It'll be about improving R&D infrastructure in India. It'll be about improving the ease of doing business. But these areas in the coming decade will be where the action is at, if you will. So I do see this as a real opportunity to bounce back for collectively to bounce back from the recession brought about by the coronavirus pandemic. But it will require, one of the challenges, I think, it will be simply hard to measure how impactful this is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is all the way from Mumbai, from the Secretary General of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, India, Kamal Vora. He is currently the Secretary General of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce in India, and he focuses on promoting trade and investment between the USA and India. Kamal has worked for the US Commercial Service as the Senior Commercial Specialist till he took over his current position. He operated from the American Consulate General in Mumbai. We've known him for at least 15 years. Kamal has coordinated a number of business and investment development delegations from India to the USA and from the US to India. Many success stories have emerged from these delegations. It's now my honor and privilege to invite Kamal to ask his question.
Thanks, Jagdeep, and thanks, Dua, for that good speech. You touched upon something and passed over lightly, so I think it gives me a chance to ask you to expand on it. United States and India are more often than not are described as natural allies, and they have been engaged. Both these countries have been engaged in dialogues on various platforms. Just last week, I think on July 14th, there was a meeting of India-US CEO Forum, which coincided with India-US Commercial Dialogue, which was co-chaired by Minister Piyush Goyal on Indian side and Secretary Wilbur Ross on the United States side. Reportedly, India and US are close to concluding an initial limited trade package. I think you mentioned that in your speech, which might eventually pave the way for a possible bilateral free trade agreement, an FTA. So what do you think, what are the benefits that India can expect from the prospective FTA with the US?
Thank you. That's I think the multi-billion-dollar question that a lot of people are looking at. I think the challenge is a fewfold. India and the US, or the US and India rather, are the first and fourth largest markets in the world. So the US, European Union, China, and sort of a distant fourth would be India. But I think a bigger challenge is that if you look at countries that have a current account deficit, the US has by some distance the largest. India has the third after the UK. So you have here two large economies, both of which are net, in some ways, net importers. I mean, if you take everything into account, not just trade, but trade, investment, finance, all of that. And so in some ways that makes a sort of negotiation, a deal between these two countries much more difficult in terms of what they're arguing over. I would see the first phase, I think it'll be, if it happens, and we've heard there've been at least 2 or 3 occasions recently where they said we were very close to signing last year. Again, we heard it again in the run up to Prime Minister Modi's, President Trump's visit to India recently, that they were very close to securing a phase 1 agreement. It did not happen. So I would wait to see once the signatures are on the line. I would not hold my breath until it actually happens. But this will be a limited and very modest agreement that will basically put an end to the two countries' retaliatory measures that they have taken over the past few years, from the suspension of GSP, Generalized System of Preferences for India, to other measures, the countermeasures that have been taken. For the most part, I think there have been attempts to keep even this trade skirmish between the two countries under control. A few things I'd like to flag. One is that if you look at the measures taken, it doesn't compare even close to what the US and China have been engaged in over the past few years. Unfortunately, I saw a lot in the Indian press that seemed to compare that the US is taking similar measures against India as it did against China. But again, the scale is at a completely different order of magnitude. India was also very slow in responding to that, deliberately so, because it did not want this to ratchet up too quickly. So there were attempts of trying to play down those differences on both sides, even though an agreement on a phase 1 deal has been elusive. Now, the step, even if a phase 1 agreement is signed, I think there are still many steps towards an FTA. On the Indian side, I think there's still a bit of a debate as to how much to engage in free trade with everyone, and how much specifically with the United States. So India recently walked out of negotiations from a regional comprehensive economic partnership. This is a 16 country prospective agreement on trade involving ASEAN, the Southeast Asian countries, along with China, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and India. India recently walked out of that. A lot of it was motivated by the concerns about China, and particularly the large trade deficit that India has with China. But while there has been more of a consensus around that issue, the question is what follows. And I think we see 2 different views in India. One is that India should actually lean west more and try and conclude favorable trade agreements with the large economies of the West, particularly the United States and European Union. Whereas there's also a very strong autarkic element that believes that free trade agreements are generally bad for India, and India should not be engaged in those kinds of things. So I think we will see an internal debate in India about that. And there will be many steps between a phase 1 deal and a final FTA. Let me end on, so if there is an FTA, we'll have to see what the content of that looks like. But I suspect, just given what we saw with NAFTA 2.0, with which the US just renegotiated, and that shows in some ways what it's prioritizing, there'll be a very big, strong push for standards, for stronger standards on the United States part, something that India will resist or will want much longer timelines for. So I do anticipate that being a major point of difference going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do want to mention that Commissioner Garcia was able to finally log on. He will be coming back to speak to us at 10:10 after the Consul General has made his remarks. It's now my privilege to invite Sanjay Rambhadran, the chair of the Texas Lyceum Metro Board and a past president of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, He is the founding principal at Versa Infrastructure, a firm specializing in program and construction management of public infrastructure. He is a board member of the Houston Metro Transit Authority, president of the Texas Lyceum, a leadership and public policy organization, a past chairman of Leadership Houston, past chairman of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce of Greater Houston, and one of the 2012 10 Outstanding Young Americans. Sanjay Rambhadran.
Thank you, Jagdeep. Thank you, Dhruva, for your remarks, and good to see you back in Houston, virtually this time and hopefully in person soon. My question may have a little bit of an overlap, but in the last 2.5 decades, the US-India relationship has grown leaps and bounds on multiple fronts, be it defense, business, space, technology, the civil nuclear agreement, LNG trade. The relationship has only gotten better, irrespective of which administration has been in power, either in Washington, DC or in New Delhi. And as you pointed out, even when it was not popular on the home front, those relations have gotten better. Are there areas, though, where you see enough progress has not been made? And if so, what are those areas and what are those stumbling blocks? As the United States seems to be looking increasingly for a democratic counterbalance to China, and India fits perfectly for that, do you see progress on these fronts in the coming decade?
Thank you, Sanjay, and good to see you again. I think it's a big question in many ways. A lot of things will be pushed further just naturally, just a closer India-US relationship, bilateral relationship, regardless of other factors. And the China factor will, I think, push certain other elements, more defense space, high technology, and so forth. I would say the two areas that have really underperformed, and I don't think they're specific to the India-US relationship. I think it's a larger Indian challenge as well. But two places which are conspicuously absent in some ways from the larger conversation, or at least at best get minor treatment. One is agriculture. You see India has a massive agriculture sector in terms of number of people employed, but not a very efficient one. And the good news is India is agriculturally quite self-sufficient. This was not true 50 years ago. I'm not saying that there hasn't been progress, and there continues to be progress. There also continues to be some international cooperation. Israeli companies, European companies, Australian companies are doing some small scale work, but you haven't seen a kind of large scale agricultural revolution in India for a number of reasons having to do with the nature of farm ownership and such, that has allowed Indian agriculture to move out of very basic from a very basic level to become globally competitive. Again, there's some exceptions. Fisheries, I think, rice exports have increased, but India is not a major net agriculture provider, given the number of people who actually work on farms in India. So that has been one area which has been, I would look less at the bilateral trade between India and the US on agriculture. There is some of that. But in terms of utilizing American knowledge, know-how, technologies to radically reform the Indian agricultural sector, something that will have to be done at some point of time. That is one area that is conspicuously absent. A second area is higher education, where there's a huge demand. Again, in some ways, this has been an area of great cooperation because you have over 100,000 Indian students in the United States at any given time, and a much larger number of Indians who have been educated in the United States, many returning to India, many staying on in the United States. So on one level, this does seem like an area of opportunity. They're made, collectively, foreign students in the United States provide 45 billion to the US economy. Indians are the second, after Chinese students, are the second largest number of students here. But the Indian educational sector higher education sectors remains, again with few exceptions, remains behind in many ways. And you just look at any global rankings of universities. Sometimes an IIT or IIM or IISc makes it into the top 200, but you don't see Indian universities featuring prominently. And it's not due to a lack of talent. Clearly, it's not due, the Indian professors who are successful all over the world. Why isn't India able to produce universities? And also, it's not as if US universities are not interested in setting up shop in India. I think, I can think of half a dozen university presidents who visited India with the interest of trying to set up campuses in India, just as they've done in China or the Middle East and other places. But that for a variety of reasons, I think much more closed Indian higher education system has not made that possible. And the reason I mentioned these two factors is these are things that are actually holding India back as a whole. Again, regardless of the India-US relationship, it is limiting the ability to do R&D, something that should be a natural, India should be a natural knowledge economy hub for that. And it's limiting the Indian workforce from graduating from agriculture to more, to manufacturing and services. So I think these are two areas where it would be nice to see much greater collaboration between India and the United States further. But a lot of the changes will actually be of a domestic nature in India.
Thank you, Dhruva. And I hope as we become more and more reliant on online tools, maybe the educational front holds a lot of potential.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It is now my pleasure to introduce the first citizen of India in Houston, Consul General of India, Aseem Mahajan, who joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1998. Prior to assuming charge as Consul General of India in Houston, in January of this year, he was Ambassador and DPR of India to the World Trade Organization in Geneva. In his earlier diplomatic assignments, he had served as the Deputy High Commissioner in the Indian Mission in Kuala Lumpur and Dhaka, and as a Consul General of India in Osaka, Japan, and in Indian missions in Tokyo and Laos. In his stints in the Ministry of External Affairs, he has served on various desks, handling affairs related to the United Nations, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and the Maldives. He has a master's degree in diplomatic studies from Oxford and a master's degree in management studies from my alma mater, the Birla Institute of Technology and Science, Pilani, and has completed training courses in WTO law from the Advisory Center on WTO law in Geneva. I'm proud that I can at least share one thing in common with this distinguished diplomat, an undergraduate degree from BITS Pilani. He speaks Japanese apart from English, Hindi, and other Indian languages. While COVID-19 may have thrown a curveball, in just a few months, granted, it's felt like decades thanks to COVID, he's done a phenomenal job engaging with the Indian diaspora and also providing much needed consular services during these trying times without skipping a beat. Please help me in welcoming the Consul General of India, Aseem Mahajan.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay, for this introduction. And Jagdeep Tarush, Commissioner Garcia, Marian from World Affairs Council, Sunanda, Mr. Raj Kalyandur from our chamber in Dallas, Mr. Vora, who's joining us from Mumbai, and of course, all the participants and other people who are connecting with us. I think Dhruv has given a very insightful overview into the dynamics of the Indo-US relations, the current state of play, the history of relations, and it has been a very meaningful interaction on the various questions which were asked. I would not go into the depths of our relationship, but I must mention, given our, as the largest democracies in the world, the shared values, the complementarities in our economies, and picking up some strands from Dhruv, what he mentioned, the potential of the relationship is really huge. We have a comprehensive strategic partnership, which has many pillars: energy, security, technology, but also the economic and trade relations, the people-to-people contact, and there is a vast, the canvas, as I say, is very wide. We have had the good fortune of, even though these are challenging times, but as Tarush mentioned initially, I think these webinars and all also help us to connect across zones, which normally people, in earlier times, no one figured out that we would be meeting across time zones and connecting with each other, exchanging views like this. So I came in here in January this year, and I would myself feel I was fortunate that at least I could make physical connects with people the way we are used to normally doing things. I was able to travel initially a few days, and then from middle of March, everything changed suddenly. And ever since, it has been a challenging time. I should not hesitate to mention that. We went through a challenging time in the beginning. We have a very large and vibrant diaspora here of over 500,000 people in southern United States. and people who are contributing to their own cities, their own towns, their states, and making substantial contribution professionally and otherwise to the economy. But it was also a time when many Indians were stranded, people were caught unaware, and no one ever knew, how to deal with this pandemic. So that brought in many challenges. And on the community front, I must acknowledge that we are really proud of the Indo-American community here, the people based in this part of United States who have not hesitated to give us unstinted support for all our initiatives, not just for supporting the community, but also supporting their own communities, connecting with us. So as Dhruv mentioned, the canvas is wide. So we are trying to do a lot of things together here in this part of United States. And I think we really have immense potential in many areas. The Chamber represents the business community and the successful Indo-Americans and other MSMEs and many organizations, both the Chamber in Houston and Dallas. They are very active chambers. They have partnered with us to do many events together. We are, as I would say, we are, trying to put the building blocks and trying to build on the work done earlier. We had a very successful visit of our Prime Minister here, Howdy Modi, which brought Houston. Everyone in India now knows where Houston is. And in any case, Houston has one of the largest number of Indians visiting and vice versa. A lot of people go for tourism from here to India, and people-to-people contact is growing. Because of our vibrant Indo-American community, we have a lot of community, social, religious, and other organizations which help us to build connects here. As far as our trade relations are concerned, Houston is also the energy capital of the world. We have major energy companies based here, all headquartered here. We have the Gas Authority of India Limited, their offices here. Oil India Limited was here. And Indo-US Energy Partnership, as many of you would know, is one of the partnerships which has really grown from a scratch to $9 billion in a short period of time, and the potential is huge. Similarly, in healthcare, Houston has the largest Medicity in the world, with institutes like MD Anderson and Baylor College and many other institutes located in a very small concentration of space. And pioneering research is going on there, healthcare, collaboration in medical research. Dhruv just mentioned, the future of the relationship. Now, having come from the World Trade Organization, a few things which I really saw closely there was that the future of economies will be decided how technologies advance. And this actually is a very important aspect of the Indo-US relationship, our partnership on technology, on building cutting-edge level technologies together, artificial intelligence, other areas where there is immense scope for collaboration. We have a lot of potential in India. The demographics of India, the potential it offers. We are the youngest country in the world, and by 2025 also India would the average age would be only 29. And I also feel that Indians, wherever they go, for example, the large number of students who come and study here in the University of Texas system or Dallas, there are thousands of students who are based in leading universities, educational institutions, think tanks, other places who are working here. They bring a lot of value because these are people who are actually people who will bring intellect, they will help the country to grow. So we don't hesitate to recognize their contribution and the value they bring here. We, in the next couple of months, we are trying to jointly do a lot of initiatives with the Chamber, with many states, with many cities on areas like healthcare, on areas like energy, on areas like information technology, on cutting edge level technologies, on aerospace and defense, manufacturing. I should also mention that recently the Confederation of Indian Industries brought out a report on the presence of Indian companies based in United States, and Texas ranks as the state which attracts the highest investment with $9.5 billion worth of investment, more than 17,500 jobs created, and in their survey 40 companies. But while I'm here, in these last couple of months, even during this pandemic, I have realized that many companies are wanting to build this connect. Many American companies are looking at India. We had earlier with us Suzanne from the Greater Houston Partnership. They are very valuable partners for us. They are really helping us to build this connect. In August, we are doing a big event on healthcare where we'll be making presentations from both sides. We will be getting people who are working on medical collaboration in medical research. And that is an area which is also in focus during this pandemic. Lastly, I wanted to mention about the global supply chains. This is something which the whole world has been seized with. And Dhruv also, I think many questions were about the free trade agreement between India and United States and our connect together. Trade is an area where obviously there will be competing interests, but if you look at the complementarities, and I just saw the recent data now, United States emerges as India's largest trading partner. On goods and services, our trade has registered a healthy growth. On the global supply chains, the potential is huge. And we are trying to integrate, we are trying to address challenges in India and also in the relationship, we're trying to connect people. But more than 2,000 American companies are already present in India. Many are trying to go from this part of United States, for example, in areas like logistics, in areas like healthcare, in areas like energy, in areas like petrochemicals, chemicals, to build and especially knowledge transfer. That is another area where American companies are wanting to partner with India, take technologies where we can bring energy efficiency or build our natural gas grids, and in the other cutting edge areas of technology where we are, where India has a lead and India offers such a trained pool of manpower who are educated in English. And lastly, also, of course, Commissioner Garcia recently visited India and he has successfully built a connect there. And we have many other people. Mayor Turner had visited India recently. Governor Abbott visited India, and governors from other states are also, they have visited and they are planning to visit it. I'm sure things will come back to normalcy soon. And with Jagdeep ji, we look forward to planning many more such events. So thank you, Dhruv, for connecting with us and giving us this insightful overview. And as I think you have mentioned, we will work together here with people, and you have already highlighted the huge opportunities which lie in the relationship, the untapped potential of the relationship, which needs to be, all of us need to work together. And we look forward to engaging on more such events. And thank you again. Over to you, Jagdeep ji.
Thank you, Consul General Mahajan. I do want to point out that Houston is very, very privileged that we are always able to bring in the cream of the Indian Foreign Service crop. Every Consul General, including our current Consul General, has been the best of the best. And it makes it very easy for the community to work with you, sir, because you know business, you know the community, and you are very open in your communication. So on behalf of the Houston Indo-American community and the Chamber, we want to thank you for your great service to our bilateral relationship with India. Before we move on to the closing remarks by Dhruv, I'm going to invite Commissioner Garcia, a very close friend of the Indo-American community, who has joined us in his Band Gala, which he picked up on our recent trip to India, where Sanjay and I had joined him. And we were focusing on bilateral trade with India, to make some very brief remarks. Commissioner Adrian Garcia.
Thank you, Jagdeep, Consul General. Good to see you. And to our distinguished guest, Jasankar, I want to welcome you to Harris County, and to all the other members and distinguished folks with the Chamber, Sanjay in particular. I would just tell you that as Jagdeep may have prodded my interest earlier this morning, it is really, and as the Consul General alluded to, I was so blessed and fortunate to be able to visit India for the first time. And there are so many opportunities, but one of the key areas of opportunity as it relates to my areas of responsibility, I represent the largest county in Texas, the third largest in America. But as the commissioner of Precinct 2, I oversee the Port of Houston. And so having had a phenomenal conversation in Mumbai related to the vision of what could be the port in Mumbai, I am so excited, and I am very, very interested in maintaining that conversation and helping to move our respective ports forward, but together. And so I just want to thank you for taking time out to share your thoughts. I was enjoying them as you were responding to some of the questions. And I just want to leave you an open invitation to return back to us, give us more perspective, because on the point of resiliency, resiliency can mean a lot of things, but at the end of the day, it's about sustaining and maintaining the relationships that are being built. That is going to help us through any pandemic, any economic turmoil, any political changes. It's going to be what will help us move forward. So with that, I would just say again, thank you for taking time out. Take a call, and we welcome you to Harris County at any time.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Garcia. Dhruva, time for your final comments. And I know Tarush, the chairman of our board, has directed some of the questions from the panelists to you. We are at 10:18, and I have a feeling this is going to last at least till 10:30. But it's such an informative session. I'm sure nobody will log off. Back to you, Dhruv.
Thank you. I think I'll just address, and thank you again to the Consul General and to Commissioner for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate in this. It really is a testament to the special relationship that Houston has with India and the state of Texas has with India. The fact that all of those things are true, that there is such a it's a major investment destination, it is a major port, and is so outward looking. And of course, the strength of the diaspora is an undercurrent to all of that. I think I'll just address some of the questions that came through from our viewers, and I'm happy to take a few more in the limited time that I have. One relates from someone named Josh, relates to the Indian space program and emerging commercial space industry. This is actually an area I worked a little bit with in some time ago, not recently, unfortunately. But the Indian space program has been something that Indians are justifiably very proud of. With a very modest budget, it has managed to do quite a lot, and is one of the few developing world space programs that is able to do regular launches of satellites. It has, of course, the attention is received from its moon mission and the Mars orbiter that was very successful a few years ago and continues to orbit Mars. But it's the day-to-day work that the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, is doing that's really quite commendable. One of the things, as the US space industry moves from the public sector, NASA-driven, to the private sector, I think that will require some changes. And one is the lower cost of space launches has suddenly made it much more viable. One of the things I think, while we will see some collaboration, we have seen some collaboration in this domain, there will also be a good level of healthy competition, of course, between Indian space launching capabilities and the emerging US private sector. So I would look at that as well, that in addition to bilateral cooperation, we will also see some level of healthy competition emerge. India has mostly been, in addition to launching Indian satellites, India has become very adept at launching microsatellites and those from developing countries, and suddenly making the cost of space launch more accessible to them. And this is something, again, that the private US industry might be moving more and more into. So I would just highlight that. That being said, I think we have seen with almost every major mission of ISRO, you have seen some components coming from the United States and from NASA in many cases. So there will continue to be emerging cooperation in that domain. Another question related to research in life sciences, and again, that's actually not an area I focus on significantly, although I suspect in the aftermath of the coronavirus pandemic, there will be immense interest in cooperation in that sector. One issue to keep in mind is that India is a leader in generic pharmaceuticals. In fact, there's a very high percentage of generic drugs that you receive in a US drugstore that are actually manufactured today in India. And this has led to two actually areas of concern. One is it has often led to friction with the American pharmaceutical industry, particularly those that are engaged in R&D, who are often in context of intellectual property issue and related issues with the Indian generic pharmaceutical sector. But the other area on the Indian side, the concerns have actually arisen related to the import and the dependency on active pharmaceutical ingredients from China to India. So China is the largest manufacturer of APIs, of active pharmaceutical ingredients that the Indian generic pharmaceutical industry is dependent upon. So I think, again, these are just some things to keep in mind as we think about further collaboration. Finally, I would say one area where there's obvious collaboration, but I'm not sure whether we'll get to that point soon. The US has, in some ways, a leading global health sector, but a growing concern has been rising costs of the health industry. And a lot of those costs are not just due to R&D and not just due to malpractice and things like that, but also due to administrative costs. And one of the things that India is pioneering as it's setting up a public health system from scratch, and there's some very innovative work being done in India on this, is actually using digital tools to keep down the costs, the administrative costs of a public health sector. So this will be one area where it does seem like there's a lot of natural collaboration between some of the innovations taking place in India with some of the demands on the US side to keep costs down while providing a high level of healthcare. So I would just point people's attention to that. But I think those are the two questions I saw that really stood out to me, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dhruv. It now comes time to propose the vote of thanks. I first want to start by thanking you, Dhruv, for making the time to give us such a brilliant presentation and to answer all the questions that were posed to you. I would also like to invite you back in the not too distant future to talk about the Indo-America-China relationship. I want to thank, on behalf of the chairman of our board and our board of directors, every one of the panelists and the Consul General of India who have joined us today. We want to thank our community partners. Bhavna, can you pull up the slide for our community partners? These are our partners who partner with us on the long term. I want to thank today's co-hosts, the Greater Houston Partnership, especially Susan Davenport and her team, and our event partners today, who I've already named and are all on this slide. I want to thank our media partners, thanks to whom we get the word out across multiple media channels. I want to thank Bhavna Kalyan, who has been responsible at the Chamber for putting together our flyers and the event. I want to thank Kosh Bayani, who will be editing today's video and sending it back to us later today. And Seva International for their live streaming of today's event, and Ravi Brahmbhatt with the Houston Community College, who's one of our volunteers, who is also live streaming through his media channel. With that, I want to end by thanking every one of today's participants for joining the event. I do want to bring to your attention our next event, which is on Open Forum this Saturday at 4 o'clock. We will be presenting a webinar on generational transition, where Balsareen will talk about his story and will be sharing the transition of their business with the next generation. And the panel will be moderated by Subodh Butcher and hosted on Open Forum, a radio program which every month on the fourth Saturday dedicates 1 hour to the Chamber Business Hour. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we want to end today's program with our thanks once again to Dhruv Jaishankar for making the time, to Adrian Garcia, our commissioner, for all the great work he does, to the Consul General of India, and to our partners and our participants for making today's event a success. Be safe, remember to wear a mask and keep the social distance, and let's get the economy back on track. Thank you very much.